global war on terror. And tonight, breaking news, NATO expansion has been confirmed this week that Finland and Sweden are both to become full members of NATO. NATO already has many aspiring members in Europe, Eastern Europe particularly. And most of them have the status of special allies. Even all of the former Yugoslavian republics, including Macedonia and Bosnia, are queuing up to join NATO. Also applying Ukraine, Georgia. Now, Russian Prime Minister Medvedev has been stating that Russia is feeling that they are being hemmed in by NATO, by NATO's expansionism, and the implementation of the US missile shield, which will be based in NATO countries. Now, over in Latin America, there have been rumours over the last week and lots of misinformation about Colombia joining NATO. Now, this has previously been rumoured before. In 2006, there was, a lot of misinformation again about, speculation about Colombia joining NATO and becoming more of a special ally of NATO, though why Colombia should really joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is a bit unclear, because they're not in the Northern Hemisphere and they do not have an Atlantic seaboard. So the way this has developed is that last week there was a state visit to Colombia by US Vice President Joe Biden. Now, he visited Colombia and had talks with President Santos, and following that, there was then another visit. President Santos hosted a special reception for the Venezuelan right-wing former presidential candidate, Governor Capriles. Now, the Governor Capriles, he's the governor of the Miranda state, and he was the losing presidential candidate. He lost to President Maduro in the recent presidential elections in Venezuela following the death of former President Hugo Chavez. Now, Capriles has refused to accept the recent presidential election results in Venezuela, and he's been demanding a recount. And subsequent to that, his refusal to accept the result has given the US the excuse to also refuse to recognize and question the legitimacy of President Maduro's election. So subsequently, the Venezuelan government has been auditing the vote. They've now managed to audit 99.8% of the vote. Now, Governor Capriles and his followers have been causing a lot of instability in Venezuela, and there's been a lot of violence and several assassinations of socialist Bolivarian activists in Venezuela. I think the deaths are up to about 14, and a number of buildings, community buildings and Socialist Party of Venezuela offices were burned down. Now, following the visit of Capriles, Governor Capriles, to Colombia, the president of Colombia, President Santos, really refused to comment on why he'd hosted a reception for Governor Capriles. And, this really caused a lot of concern in Venezuela, where the government there is fearing some kind of U.S.-backed coup d'état or intervention, and was feeling that Capriles' visit to Colombia and the lack of information about what was all that about. Gave them really grounds to, be concerned about this visit and, about its significance. So this caused a reaction from the countries of Ecuador, Bolivia, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, amongst others. Then, to top it all, President Santos announced that he was applying for Colombia to join NATO, and this, caused even more of a reaction amongst all of the countries of UNASUR, the Latin American Alliance. All this appears to have been a bit of a misinformation, as the Colombian foreign minister subsequently denied that Colombia is applying to join NATO, but will remain a special ally of NATO, and is applying to send their troops to assist NATO in its so-called peacekeeping interventionist wars. So, moving round on the other side of the globe to Iraq, the sectarian violence in Iraq has escalated over the last 2 months, and it is estimated that there's now been over 1,200 people killed in the past 2 months. The surge of sectarian violence in Iraq is continuing, with at least 33 people killed. That would be last Thursday, in yet another wave of attacks. According to the UN, more than 500 people were killed in Iraq in the month of May, while more than 700 died in April, marking the bloodiest month there in nearly 5 years. Fear is so high that there's even been a ban on cars bearing certain types of license plates in an attempt to stop the rash of car bombings. So, next door in Syria, there is the coming conference sponsored by the US and Russia to look at how they can find a peaceful solution to the Syrian crisis. Now, as the conflict continues to deepen, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has agreed in principle to attend the international talks in Geneva, but he has said that any deal reached at the meeting would need to be approved by the Syrian people through a referendum. He said, quote, very simply, our only condition is that any agreement as a result of any meeting, inside or outside Syria, including the conference, should be subject to the opinion of the Syrian people, a referendum for the Syrian people. This is our only real condition. Anything else has no value. This is why we will go to this conference feeling comfortable. We have no worries. They can put anything up for discussion on the table, but nothing will be implemented without the opinion of the Syrian people. And we are the legitimate representative of the Syrian people, so there is nothing we are afraid of. Unfortunately, the opposition group, the Syrian National Council, has said that it will not attend the peace talks this month. A spokesperson said the talk about international conference and a political solution to the situation in Syria has not been agreed by the Syrian National Council. So over in Palestine, or actually in Israel, sorry, correction on that. You may have heard of the Nakba, which took place in Palestine. That would be in 1948. This was a purge of Palestinians by Jewish militias, which preempted the establishment of the Zionist state of Israel. So this purge was across Palestine, and villages were burned down, many people were killed, there were many massacres, many of them undocumented. Now, just this week, workers at a cemetery restoration project in Jaffa have discovered 6 mass graves with hundreds of skeletons of Palestinians killed during the Nakba, and this corroborates the oral testimony previously given by eyewitnesses of massacres and hasty burials in the city of Jaffa, or Joppa as it's sometimes known, and the surrounding areas. Israel commentators have been already frantically arguing that the victims could have been killed by the British, other Arabs, or pretty much anyone else except for the Jews. So history has, a habit of, exposing evidence, and be sure that, these things, these crimes will be found out, however long it takes, and there will be justice. In Pakistan, there was a drone attack which killed the Pakistani Taliban deputy leader, and the Pakistani Taliban is, as you would expect, now vowing revenge against the US government and particularly the Pakistani government for its alleged complicity in the US drone strikes that killed their group's deputy chief. a spokesperson for the Pakistani Taliban said the group was cancelling its offer of peace talks and accused the Pakistani government of providing information that helped the CIA find Rehman Massoud, who was killed by a drone last week in North Waziristan, along with 6 other people. You may remember me talking at the last show about the twist to the tale of the alleged Boston bombers, where an associate or former associate of one of the brothers, Tamerlan Tasanev, was shot dead by the FBI. Now, the father of the Chechen man shot dead while being questioned by an FBI agent has spoken out about his son's killings. Now, his son, Ibrahim Todashev, was reportedly unarmed, though there were, as is often, there were different accounts. First he had a knife, next he had a metal bar. At the end of the day, it looks like he was unarmed, and therefore they had to, the FBI agents had to defend themselves and to put 7 bullets into his body and then follow it up with a coup de grace to his head. So you can see from the body there's a big hole in his head. So that was definitely murder, without a doubt. And this is what the father is saying. On last Thursday, Abdul Baki Todashev showed photographs of his son's corpse and said he was shot 7 times. He accused the FBI of tormenting his son for 8 hours and called for those responsible to be put on trial. He said, quote, "At the moment, I want justice, and I want there to be an investigation so that these people are tried under American law. These are not FBI agents, but bandits. I cannot call them anything else, and they must be tried." The FBI has provided differing accounts of the episode, with some initially claiming Todashev have a knife. Unnamed officials are now saying he flipped over a table and lunged at an agent with a metal pole before being shot. So that's one to watch. You know, there seems to be a lot of a twist to this story. In another and completely unrelated incident, the sister of the 2 brothers, who actually lives in New Jersey, was actually caught growing marijuana last week, and she was charged along with her boyfriend with growing marijuana to sell it. So you know, it's a kind of complex world, isn't it? And I think one day we will get the truth about these you know, Boston bombings and what went on. And that will be certainly interesting. In Germany this week, there has been a Blockupy protest which targeted the European Central Bank. Thousands of protesters with the activist movement Blockupy have blocked access to the European Central Bank in Frankfurt, Germany, in a protest against European austerity. The demonstrators were barricaded themselves outside the bank, preventing anyone from getting in, and you know, they were then confronted by police in riot gear. The action comes as the unemployment rate in the Eurozone has risen to a new record of 12.2%. That is more than 19 million people in Europe are now out of work. At Guantanamo Bay prison, the hunger striking prisoners at Guantanamo have written an open letter asking the military doctors to stop contributing, to stop taking part in what they call abusive conditions. The letter calls out to the doctors and criticises them for taking part in force feeding and pleads that they should be independent medical professionals in their place. 13 prisoners have signed the letter, and it says, quote, "Your dual loyalties make trusting you impossible. You will have to live with what you have done and not done here at Guantanamo for the rest of your life. You can make a difference. You can choose to stop actively contributing to the abusive conditions I am currently enduring." More than 100 of Guantanamo's 166 prisoners are currently taking part in the hunger strike. At least 36 of them are being force-fed through tubes down their throat. There's been massive anti-government protests sweeping Turkey after the police response, disproportionate violent response to protesters who were campaigning to save a park in the centre of the city. Tens of thousands of people rallied across the country on Sunday for a third consecutive day of mass demonstrations. The unrest erupted when thousands converged at Istanbul's Taksim Square, a public space which was set to be demolished. The protesters have managed to remain despite a heavy police crackdown, including tear gas and rubber bullets. The Turkish government says around 1,000 people have been detained at more than 200 protests nationwide. The Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan has dismissed the uproar as the work of political opponents and extremists, vowing to proceed with the government's plans to develop Taksim Square. But in contradiction of that, the Deputy Prime Minister has made a statement criticising the police violence that escalated the demonstrations. So in Afghanistan, there's been suicide attacks of a military convoy in eastern Afghanistan. The attack killed 7 Afghans and 2 US soldiers.
Now,
over in Syria, the UN panel on human rights is accusing both sides of the Syrian conflict of reaching new levels of brutality after more than 2 years of fighting between the government and rebel forces. The UN panel chair, Paul Pinheiro, accused government forces of murder, but he said anti-Assad rebels were guilty of similar atrocities. Paul Pinheiro stated, quote, "Anti-government armoured groups have also committed war crimes, including murder, sentencing and execution without due process, torture, hostage-taking and pillage. They continue it to endanger the civilian population by positioning military objectives in civilian areas. And as we have said in the past, there is a disparity between the violations or crimes committed by the government forces and those committed by the rebels. But this is a disparity in intensity. It's not a disparity in the very nature of the crimes and violations. They are the same. The UN panel also found that there were reasonable grounds to believe limited amounts of chemical weapons have been used in Syria, but said it was not able to determine who was responsible. A British-based group, the London-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, now says more than 96,000 people have died in the Syrian conflict. According to their report, more than 40% of those killed were government soldiers or pro-government militia members. The UN has put the total number of dead at 80,000. It's also reported that the US is withholding more than 60 million pounds in aid to Syria's main opposition group out of concern about its lack of organisation. The battle around the western Syrian town of Qusayr has been raging, and it does look like the government has actually retaken Qusayr from the opposition forces, but clearly this is at a cost to the civilian population. There are reports of hundreds of wounded residents after the weeks of fierce fighting between the army and the rebels. One doctor told the Associated Press that the wounded are being treated in private homes after the main hospital was destroyed. Medical supplies, food and water are reportedly running out, and bids to evacuate the wounded have stalled after a convoy was attacked and 13 people were killed last week. The International Committee of the Red Cross has sought access to the town, but has not been able to negotiate that. Over in the US, the Fort Hood massacre suspect, the US Army psychiatrist Major Nidal Hassan, who is accused of massacring 13 people at Fort Hood in Texas in 2009, has decided to represent himself at his trial. He could face the death penalty for allegedly opening fire on fellow soldiers. Hassan says he's going to defend himself based on a so-called defense of others argument, which would require him to prove he was protecting others from imminent harm. There is speculation Hassan might try to argue that he was protecting potential victims of the US war in Afghanistan from soldiers at the Fort Hood who were set to deploy there. Hassan's defense strategy will allow him to question the people he is charged with wounding during his alleged attack. In a new escalation of the war and terror in Africa, the United States is now offering bounties for the location of terror suspects, much like they previously did in Pakistan and Afghanistan, when they gave bounties for, terror suspects, and that resulted in most of the people in Guantanamo being kidnapped by people purely for financial gain. So the US is for the first time offering bounties for information leading to the location of terror suspects in West Africa. On Monday, the State Department offered a total of $23 million to help locate 5 top militants from groups including the mythical Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. The largest bounty is $7 million for the leader of the Nigerian-based group Boko Haram. In Egypt, this week, an Egyptian activist and blogger has received a 6-month sentence for criticizing Egyptian President Morsi. The blogger Ahmed Doumi has been given a 6-month suspended jail sentence for criticizing President Morsi. He's the first well-known critic of Morsi to be convicted among several who were arrested in March. He was found guilty of insulting the president and spreading false news after calling Morsi a killer following a deadly crackdown in Port Said in February. The US has imposed new sanctions on Iran. They've imposed another round of sanctions on top of the existing ones on Iran in the latest attempt to force concessions from Iran over its alleged nuclear weapons program. The new sanctions particularly target Iran's auto manufacturing industry and its currency, the rial, in a bid to make the currency unacceptable outside of Iran. Okay, and another breaking report from Afghanistan. I've reported on previous programs about the outrage in Afghanistan about the disappearance of a number of civilians in the Wardak province that have been linked to US Special Forces operations and to Afghan army units that were linked to US Special Forces. Now, as a result of this, President Karzai had ordered all of the US Special Forces out of Wardak province. There have been large demonstrations, many large demonstrations in Wardak province and also in Kabul about these kidnappings. Effectively, these civilians were taken from their homes by armed units which were comprised of Afghan National Army and US Special Forces, and they have not been seen since. The US and NATO command have denied that these operations took place, that these individuals were taken by US or NATO forces, and now in a dramatic turn of events, there has been revealed a number of bodies found at a former US Special Forces base. Now, the report states that when relatives identified 3 mutilated bodies dug up near a former US Special Forces base as their missing family members. They decided to take the corpses to the capital of Wardak province and to organise a protest to spread the word of their loss and the confirmation of the murder of their relatives. Now, by the noon on Tuesday, there were hundreds of people flooding the streets of the Maiden Shah town, blocking the main road to Kandahar and to Kabul, and shouting "Death to America" and "Death to Special Forces." By the early afternoon, two of those were dead and one was seriously injured after the Afghan National Police opened fire in order to control what they said was an increasingly violent crowd. The three bodies were just the latest grisly discovery in the troubled Nek district in Wardak province, where locals say a string of civilians disappeared into a military base housing US Special Forces. They claim that the victims had been tortured and then killed. The families and supporters are blaming American forces, although the base was one which was shared between US Special Forces and Afghan National Army. And a US military spokesperson has strongly denied any abuses by foreign soldiers. The locals continue to blame US forces. They said, "We've now found 10 bodies of people killed by Americans in total, 7 before and 3 more today on the west side of the US base." Again, be sure your crimes will find you out. The report goes on to say they cut their fingers and beat their stomach and heads with rocks. And they were poor people who had just ordinary businesses and were just working to feed their families. A senior Wardak politician said 10 men all vanished at the end of last year, and their families had been seeking news of them for months. The US has repeatedly denied accusations that people arrested by special forces in Wardak province died in American custody. However, the villagers accused the Americans and their Afghan partners of intimidation through unprovoked beatings, mass arrests and forced detention. Now, over in the US, at Fort Meade in Maryland, the trial of Bradley Manning has started this week. Now, Bradley Manning has elected to have a court-martial heard by a judge rather than by a jury of his peers. The judge hearing the case is Judge Colonel Denise Lind. The prosecution has alleged that Manning had purposefully aided and abetted the enemy through the WikiLeaks documents that he downloaded. The prosecution conclude by saying that Osama bin Laden allegedly requested and received a copy of internal US military logs of the war in Afghanistan from another member of Al-Qaeda. The US is now charging Bradley Manning with aiding and abetting the enemy, a charge that could actually carry life or even the death penalty. Now, the defence's opening statement responded that Bradley Manning is younger and naive, but was with good intentions. His attorney, David Coombs, said that Manning thought that the public should know what was going on in the war and how the US government was operating. He was troubled by the response of the government to requests for information from the Reuters news agency concerning the deaths of the Reuters journalists from an Apache helicopter attack, which was featured in the video which Bradley Manning released, now known as the Collateral Murder, as well as the 2009 Guarani airstrike that killed over 150 civilians. Okay, so I'm just wondering if there's anybody out there listening, and if you want to call in and chat, we've got a few minutes left, and you can call in on 0161 298 0298 or Skype at Bob's Backyard. Okay, so today, continuing with the trial of Bradley Manning, the defense attorney, David Coombs, described how Bradley Manning came to the position where he took the actions that he did. So he recounted how on December the 24th, Christmas Eve, in Iraq, an American military convoy was traveling through a road, and a vehicle with 5 civilians had to move to the side of the road to get out of the way of that military convoy. So when that vehicle moved off the road to get out of the way of the convoy, a roadside bomb went off and clearly, missed the convoy, but injured 5 civilians in the car, and one of those civilians died on the way to hospital. Now, Bradley Manning was affected by this because his fellow soldiers at the base were celebrating the fact that no American soldiers had died. Right, hello there, we've got a caller. Is that Amy? Hello, Amy. Are you there, Amy? Okay, we'll come back to you if you're still there in a minute. Okay, so this behaviour of his fellow soldiers, celebrating the fact that no US soldiers had died, really affected Bradley Manning, and he couldn't celebrate, and he couldn't get over the death of the Iraqi family on Christmas Eve, and the injuries. So Coombs describes Manning not as a typical soldier. He apparently wore custom dog tags that said on the back "humanist," and which is a religious belief which places humans first and places a high value on human life. Bradley Manning wanted to give the best possible information to his command and to save lives. He had a strong desire to help his unit and wanted all soldiers to return safely. But after the Christmas Eve incident, he found he could no longer read military incident reports from Iraq or human intelligence reports and not think about the death of that family. So clearly, this was Bradley Manning developing the conscience that led him to take the actions to release the documents to WikiLeaks about human rights abuses and war crimes which were being committed by US forces. Okay. Have we got a caller out there? No? Okay. Right. I'll continue. Okay, one thing that's struck me recently is the way in which the information about Syria is being reported differently through different news agencies, and the double standards that the Western media has about publishing the facts on Syria. Rather, they are publishing the facts that suit our government's narrative. Now, I'm just going to quote from this is an article in a popular British newspaper, and it talks about signs of toxic chemicals in 4 raids in Syria conflict. Chemical weapons are thought to have been used at least 4 times in Syria's civil war, the UN has said. We've already heard that, but it's the way in which this is presented that it added that more evidence was needed and called on the Syrian regime to lead a team of experts into the country. And that gives the impression there that the Syrian regime is actually blocking access to the UN investigation team. It then goes on to repeat allegations made by the French government that the nerve agent sarin has been used on several occasions, and it basically it infers that the Syrian government is responsible for that, and that they are definitely, it says there, that they are not allowing, or implies that they're not allowing the UN team in to investigate. Now, on the contrary, there are reports that the Syrian government is actually urging the UN to come in and investigate, and for other reports of chemical weapons to be investigated. So there was, and this was not reported at all, really, in the Western media, that Turkish security forces found a 2-kilo cylinder with sarin gas after searching the homes of Syrian militants from the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Nusra Front. This is in Turkey, in the southern province of Adana and Murcia, and following this police search, they found these chemical weapons, this sarin gas, which the UN is looking to investigate. So there is absolutely no information that the Turkish authorities are actually handing this over to the UN, or indeed have, reported the matter. They're actually refusing to comment on the arrests, it would appear. Syria reacted strongly to the incident and called for a thorough investigation into the detention of these Syrian militants who were in possession of sarin gas. Now, the other thing that I really wanted to talk about with Syria is the way in which we in the West are really how we accept and meekly, placidly accept the need for military intervention, and particularly intervention by the Western powers. How we perceive that we have this God-given right to intervene in other countries, allegedly for their benefit. Now, it is a part of our, I think, certainly colonial history, maybe, and our imperial history, that we accept this premise of humanitarian intervention, which we have seen has proved to be anything but humanitarian, and often, is vicious and destabilizing to the country concerned. So a humanitarian intervention has provided the Western powers, France, the UK, and the US, with the perfect ideological justification and internal moral rationalization to continue to act as the world policeman for the capitalist system. And by providing this human rights excuse for intervention, humanitarian intervention, this allows us to actually feel quite at ease with what our countries are doing. It is basically, and I've thought this for a long time, it is a kind of a thinly updated version of the white man's burden that took us to colonize Africa and Asia, that we feel that we have to help these people, that it's for their own good. So, I'm not going to go on much more on that theme, but you can see how the Western powers are gearing up for another humanitarian intervention. So what I'm going to say to you is, don't believe the lie. This is not to help them. This is not to provide humanitarian assistance. It will not in any way benefit the people of Syria. This is purely for the Western powers to achieve their strategic interests. It is to provide the justification for the US, France, the UK and Israel to escalate their proxy war, which has now to some extent run into the ground, and to take military action to bring down the Assad regime. Now, as a part of this, just this week, okay, we're coming to the end of the show. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.
This is a public health announcement. Cannabis cures cancer.